India and South Asia will be victims of climate change impacts.
Global emissions became zero tomorrow. Would climate change stop? No.
83% of the climate variability is caused by nature, and we human beings have a control on only 17%.
As I see it, the politics are as follows. There is more and more evidence that climate change will have impacts on us, and there is more and more concern. I won't say there is evidence, but there is concern that we will be worst hit because of climate change. But more than ever, the North wants to shift the entire burden of transition or mitigation to reduce emissions from them to us. And so even if in the 80s or in the 90s and 2000, the period when climate change was still being deliberated, it was being talked about, and there was obviously moves to shift the burden on us. But now between Copenhagen to Cancun, that's the period I'm talking about, the moves have become much more stronger, much more apparent, that they want to do nothing and they want us to cut emissions. In the negotiations, we are compromising our position and getting too little in return. And that is really where our concern with the current negotiations are. That the North is extremely reluctant to do anything, and we are essentially trying to find ways to work around the northern countries and say, please take, we will do more so that you will take on something. But the issues that are important for us to recognize is, first, impacts are difficult to predict, and they're difficult to say that this is because of climate change. I mean, let's be very clear. Pakistan has gone through floods. Now, there is a concern, there is an issue in Pakistan that this is because of climate change. They had unusual rain events. They had cloudbursts in Pakistan. And the issue was that, is this because of climate change? In Ladakh, in India, we had a very unusual cloudburst, which led to a huge landslide and a massive devastation in regions of Ladakh. Was that because of climate change? We've had unseasonal rainfalls in large parts of eastern India. Is that because of climate change? We've had very unseasonal temperatures that are happening, sometimes very cold, sometimes not so cold. Is that because of climate change? When we report and we write, we cannot say that the floods of Pakistan or the landslide in Ladakh was certainly because of climate change. But it is very clear, therefore, that we need more long-term data, we need more research for us to understand what are the trends and what are they showing. Now, the unfortunate part of this is that the trends need long-term data, but history is also happening today, because the fact is that these events are happening now. And so scientists are often at a disadvantage, because those trends will only have, data will only get collected in the next 10 years. And the fact is, those next 10 years may be too late. So it's a very difficult issue which is on the table right now. It's difficult for scientists, it's difficult for journalists, it's difficult for policymakers. So I think it's becoming such a difficult issue to unpackage. That is the flood only because of climate change, or is it because of mismanagement? Or is it mismanagement and an unseasonal rainfall? So it's a difficult issue. Yet, if you look at what the MOEF, the Ministry of Environment, has just put out a new report, it's called 4x4 assessment. I'm told that there are 4 means
4 places.
4 sectors and 4 ecosystems, right? Our minister loves catchy words, so 4x4 assessment. It's a basic, there's no new research in this report, it's on their website, but if you get an overall, it gives you an overall perspective of what is expected because of climate change. And it basically tells you that you will expect temperature increases to go up from 1.7 to 2 degrees centigrade, which is something like what the global temperature increase is about. But they are talking about maximum increase in coastal areas of India. We are not clear what the source of data for that is, but there seems to be a greater sense that it's going to increase in coastal areas. The second big story is that it will increase, rainfall will actually increase in all regions. But I will come back to this, and you will also hear more about it in the afternoon. And so there will be a risk of floods, and the report also says that there is a huge risk of storm surges. So if the news is bad, and that's my second part, if the news is bad, and we know that we are going to be badly affected, then clearly it's taken for granted that we need tough action to cut emissions. There should be no two ways about this. We need emissions to be cut. We need the North, which is responsible for the emissions, to take actions to cut emissions as fast as possible. But if you look at it, the first climate convention happened in 1988. First conference happened in 1988. The convention was signed in 1992. We are completing 30 years? 20 years. 20 years of the convention next year, or 2 years from now. In 1997, the world agreed in Kyoto, which is why it's called the Kyoto Protocol, that there would be a 5% reduction over 1990 levels by industrialized countries. So if I look, in 1997, the northern countries at Kyoto agreed that they will cut their emissions 5% on an average over 1990 levels. So whatever their emissions were in 1990, by 2008, 2012, between 2008 2012. If I look at it in 2010, the Kyoto targets have not been met. The industrialized country emissions are in fact increasing, and the world definitely is at risk. This group of countries has two separate groups. One is the Annex I countries, which are the rich countries, and the other is the Soviet economies, which in 1990 were emitting a lot, and since then their economies have crashed. Economies in transition. Okay? So Poland, all the rest of it will come here. But they were all part of Annex I. Now, when you look at data from these countries, they will tell you, oh, we are meeting the Kyoto targets, no problems, we are cutting emissions. But what we did was to take the data, disaggregate it from the website. We took their raw data, disaggregated it. Now then you get a very different picture. You get a picture that the rich countries, like on an average, if I look at it, they have cut 1.3% by 2006. Okay, on an average. So yes, they're meeting somewhere, not quite the Kyoto target, which is 5%, but let's say they are somewhere. They're responsible countries. Okay, but if you disaggregate it, the picture changes, because the rich country emissions actually went up 14.5%. Okay. And it was only because the emissions of the economies in transition collapsed and their emissions went down roughly 30% that these people could actually say that they were meeting some targets. Now the picture has slightly changed in the recent, we are giving you the absolute data, latest data for 2008. The reason is the economic downslide that is happening in the Western world. So as a result of it, if you look at it, they are down 6.1% over 1990 levels. So they will definitely come to Cancun and say that yes, they are meeting their Kyoto target. But again, if you disaggregate it, you will find the rich industries have actually increased by 8%. And that the economies in transition are still down over 1990 levels by 37%. Now that's the fudging that is happening in data, that is happening constantly in data, and that we have to recognize.